Fantastic report there from Adesu Amaran. Well, African Affairs Analyst Dr. Victor Okhai is here with us to discuss the final points of that maiden UN General Assembly address by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. It's good to see you again.
Good afternoon.
Here on Newsday.
Thank you for having me.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of takeaways from the president's speech. Very well put together. About 20 minutes he addressed the UN General Assembly yesterday. But one thing that stood out, that quote, which was even featured in that VT, was Africa's development being prioritized. And the president said something. He said the question is not whether Nigeria is open for business, but the question is how much of the world is truly open to doing business with Nigeria and Africa in an equal, mutually beneficial manner. What do you think about that quote, Doctor?
First of all, well-crafted speech. Let me start with that. I like the way it started with what the UN, how the UN was created and what it was created for, But I also had an issue with that beginning. I'm going to come to the question. But there was a part there that where it talked about failures in good governance have hindered Africa, but broken promises. Where he said we must ask for identical programs and actions in addition to seeking that we don't need to ask, we are not asking for identical programs and actions. I don't agree. I mean, because UN were supposed to be equal partners, okay? The basis for which everyone is a shareholder. The basis for setting up the UN is to be able to create a more peaceful, cohesive and progressive world, if you like. So we must ask for, equal partnership. The way Europe was rehabilitated and the rest of the world after war, I think Africa deserves the same because it has been plundered for so long. That is the part I fought in the beginning, after talking about the premise, for setting up the UN. But otherwise, like I said, great speech. The part about Nigeria being ready for business, the question is whether the world is ready for us. I do have a problem with that. And why do I say so? I spoke at an international tourism conference in Nigeria, a very big conference recently, and the Minister of Tourism for, Malawi was here. She was embarrassed, held at the airport for 4 hours. They had to call their embassy, okay? Our own Minister of Tourism never showed up. Now, it's little things like this. One thing to have a beautiful speech, which is not a problem, but it's whether that speech is, whether the principal actually believes in and will apply what is in that speech. That disconnect is where I have a problem. And I think we have a lot to do in the area of ease of doing business. Our customs, our immigrations are our worst ambassadors. I must say this, And I thought we would dwell a lot on the problem of corruption and how to deal with corruption as well, because it is a bane to doing business, in Nigeria. But one thing again is he generally talked about the African issues, the African problems, how we have been exploited here for so long and how, our resources. He went on to talk about things that are happening in the north, in DRC and the rest. I thought that was good because that was a great stage to talk about it. The world has plundered Africa for so long. The problems in Africa, apart from the fact that we have issues of governance, we treated at the beginning of the speech, he admitted that, and the corruption of our leaders. But one thing is clear, that the world has seen us as, just a resource a resource base for feeding their factories. We're not supposed to be producing. We're just supposed to be feeding their factories. And if we try to come together in a cohesive way to own our own businesses and factories, then they just foment war, and divide us so that we're never stable and they can continue to plunder. He gave the example of, without mentioning Zamfara, but he gave an example of what's happening, with gold in Zamfara, where people just come, create problems, sponsor, terrorists, and then enter there and begin to plunder.
Indeed, and it came across as though there were some, insinuations that were being made, maybe the president not saying things very directly, but, hinting at them. An excerpt was when he said, and I quote, "The pillage of one nation's resources by the overreach of firms and people of stronger nations must end." I'm wondering if you saw that as an indicator to a different approach, probably like what we're seeing, happening in Niger, probably, in retaliation, I might want to use that word, to France's exploitation of the country. So, do you see some connection between that part of the statement and probably the way that the relationships will be dealt with in terms of like the Niger conflict, like I mentioned earlier, and other countries of sorts?
Well, clearly, Africa, in spite of Nigeria's problems, Africa and Africans indeed look up to Nigeria for leadership. He should have seized the gauntlet there. That's not the time to be. It's not about being diplomatic, but it's about stating facts as they are, so that you set an agenda, for discussion, both within the General Assembly and in the side meetings and all that. It's time to let them know that, look, you're responsible for our problems. For instance, he made an indirect statement to the issue of migrants going across. He didn't put it quite in those words. But the truth is, when you plunder Africa, you cannot stop us from going out to seek for better, So they are responsible for these problems. Strengthen Africa, and we won't bother you. You should spell it out and state this. There's no point coloring it. He was a bit gracious in his conversation about his talk about Niger. I'm happy to note that it does appear government is listening and that they are engaging with our brothers in Niger and the rest. And that's how it should be. That's the Ubuntu spirit. Africans must, look after Africans, clearly.
All right, then. Still touching on this, resource justice was a significant point in this speech. Of course, and when we even look at what's going on in a country like Niger, for example, how can African nations, with the help of the international community, begin to address this issue of, illegal resource exploitation and promote this equitable resource management in itself to benefit local communities when we're taking that aspect from the president's speech at the UN General Assembly?
That's where the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement comes in. I wish I had made reference to that. You see, I gave an example. I think it was a speech somewhere in Ghana. I told them, I said, look, you're being suspicious of Nigerians and all that. If I go to your country and I build a house, I will not take that house away. You understand? If I build an estate, granted, when you invest, you make profit. Those are the dividends. I'm not going to take it away. And the best people to invest in Africa are Africans. We need to open up. Niger, look at the irony. Niger produces uranium that powers industries and the economy of France, okay? But they don't have light. When they had issue, when Nigeria is also supplying light, and when they decided to put an embargo, I was in a Zoom meeting with some people across the continent, and somebody from Niger was talking about how they have light for only about 3 hours, and it's so terrible what they're going through. And I felt pain in my spirit. How can you be living by, excuse my language, River Niger and washing your hand with spittle? I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. You're producing uranium, powering all this. So with the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, I think that it opens up Africa. We should open up road networks. Even if the air thing is not working, open up road networks, railway networks, and we're able to reach each other and allow people to come in, invest. Remember one thing, the people that invest are not going to carry this on their heads. The infrastructure they put on the ground will remain in your country. It will beautify your country. It will employ people in your country. So that's an area that, we need to, taking leadership, Nigeria should be able to lead in this and then make sure that we open up and support each other. If we come together and we're united, frankly, we don't need the West. And with diaspora remittances and the brains we have, human capital we have in the diaspora, if we encourage them and they come back home, we're good.
And very well said. Well, Dr. Okhai, another part that stood out for me, because I like to, try to look as closely as possible, was when the president recalled the removal of the costly and corrupt fuel subsidy. I'm reading it verbatim, while also discarding a noxious exchange rate. Do you think it was too soon to probably brag about that, considering the realities on ground at the moment?
You know what that speech reminded me of? I think what's this thing called now? When the IMF gives you conditionalities, what they call it, structural adjustment program, SAP. And then you begin to put on these, apply some of these things, and they begin to hail you. When the West hail you, it is in their interest, not necessarily. Whatever they hail you for, praise you for, is ultimately in their interest. And we must seek a balance between what is in our best interest, first of all, and what is also in their interest. There's no doubt that in the long run, there might be benefits. I have no doubt about that. But I think it's too early to begin to beat one's chest because perhaps people in the West have been praising the move, saying that was a great move. It's like that's like sucking up to them, So I think that what we should look at, what is most important for us is the welfare of our people, both in the short term and in the long term. Because if a man dies today, however good your policies are, it's of no use to him in the grave. We must survive first. And then maybe it just brings up the issue of climate change as well, even though I know that, you see, for me, climate change must be predicated on what is in our best interest. These people have polluted the world more than anybody else. They're talking about climate change. They're not talking about what's happening in Ogoni. What they spill and all the things that they've done in the system there, where both flora and fauna have been destroyed completely. The people cannot fish, they cannot do anything. So when you're talking about climate change, we must tailor it to suit our local environment and see what's in our best interest. If right now what I can afford and use is firewood, let me survive first. Excuse me, let me say in pidgin English, when I don't chop belleful, then I can begin to talk about other things. So I think that every government must first of all look at what's in its best interest and not be dictated to from outside, because they've messed up the whole place. The industrialization and everything that is happening is from that end. How much emission do we contribute here? Even the bad cars that come here and pollute the environment, they're from that place, not from here. But we do that because we've been impoverished. If we could use our resources, we'll buy brand new cars, we'll buy electric cars, and in any case, when you start, if you want to eliminate fossil oil, we are the first to lose, because that's what we depend on. You cannot cut your nose to spite your face. Let's survive first, and then we can. So let it not be dictated from them. They must not set the agenda for us on climate change. We must look at what is in our best interest and adapt it to suit the world.
All right, then. Thank you so much. African Affairs Analyst Dr. Victor Okhai there with the analysis. We have to get it right here first before we are dictated to by the West. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your time and analysis.